This recording is being made as part of the Legacy Project, which is being conducted by the California Courts of Appeal Oral History. And this morning we have with us Justice Richard D. Fybel from the 4th District Court of Appeal, Division 3 in Orange County. And I'm Kathleen O'Leary, the presiding justice at the court, and it's my pleasure to conduct the interview. So let's get started. Justice Fybel, I'm fortunate to have known you so well that this interview should be relatively painless, honest. I know you grew up in California in the Westchester area of Los Angeles, and I also know your parents were a huge influence on you throughout your life. So why don't we start with, can you tell us about your early years in Westchester and about the role your parents played in your life?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank the Legacy Project for conducting this interview and my good friend K.O. for asking the questions. As she knows, and anybody who's read my opinions know, I generally tell you what I'm about to tell you so you don't have to wait till the end of the story. So I thought I would make a couple points to begin, which is, what you're going to learn is that I've been very fortunate to have a loving family with my parents and my wonderful wife of almost 53 years, Susan.
I second that. Wonderful wife, Susan.
Thank you. And our children, Stephanie and Dan, Dan's wife, Garland, our four wonderful grandchildren, and my brothers, Gary and Kirk, and their wives, and my Uncle Harry and Jerry. So you're going to hear a lot about everybody. And then in my professional life, I've been very blessed to have worked with and have been mentored by many really terrific people and lawyers and judges. So that's what you're going to learn. You wanted me to start with my childhood, and that's how we prepared this. But of course, I'll do my first curveball of the day and say, to understand my childhood and my parents, you have to go, I was born in 1946, you have to go back to basically 1938 to really understand my family. And the short version is that both my parents are immigrants to this country. Start with my father, Ernest, who in July of 1938 escaped with his parents and his brother from Germany via Holland to come to America. He was only saved in Germany and allowed to immigrate because of the help of other people, including bankers who didn't report him for taking money out, and the police for not reporting him to the Gestapo, and the people that worked for him who helped him escape. My mother escaped Lithuania in 1939. She was the one who arranged for all the travel to the United States and getting the visa at the age of 16. She was an extraordinarily brave woman, and you'll learn a lot more about her. And then my parents met here in Los Angeles and got married. So I come from a family of immigrants who were very grateful for the opportunities that America offered them.
And you never forgot the opportunities they received.
I never forgot them, and I try to act on them my whole life. We were raised in Westchester, which is near the LA airport. Actually, when we were growing up, there was no LA airport. There was a little small airport, then it became an international airport. And it was a really good life growing up. It was a wonderful childhood. My father was a manual laborer until the age of 40. He was a gardener who went house to house, not a landscape person like you think of today, but he went house to house, and I think he got a quarter for every lawn he mowed. I was thinking about my childhood, and the one thing I remember is the smell of my childhood. He had an International Harvester truck, and so every night he'd bring home these burlap bags filled with lawn clippings. And that's the smell I remember. He was a very hard worker. He was persistent. At the age of 40, he decided to go into real estate. Went to night school, became a broker. Ernie Fybel became the realtor of choice for particularly Jewish families in Westchester. It became buy and sell with Fybel. He changed the pronunciation of the name. I do the original Fybel because my mom pronounced it Fybel, and so that must be the correct spelling. My mother, Ruth Fybel, was, I often have said, the smartest person I've ever met. Just an amazing human being. I say she arranged for immigration to the United States in 1938, did all the visa work herself, arranged for all the travel. Who does that at 16? Came to America, worked in a sweatshop during World War II, raised a wonderful family. I have two brothers, Gary and Kirk. The oldest, Gary's 4 years younger. Kirk is 4 years younger than he is. As you'll learn later, both of them have become very successful in their lives. Long marriages, and Gary was the chief executive officer of one of the big Scripps hospitals in San Diego and now retired. Kirk basically was an entrepreneur and philanthropist, and he's now retired too. So we had a really good life. Both my parents were active in the Jewish community. My dad was synagogue president for 2 terms. My mom was always involved in activities. They were very supportive and encouraging, loving people. We went to public schools throughout.
Westchester High?
Westchester High, the
Okay.
Comets.
Okay.
You know, I was a school officer in junior high school, Airport Junior High, and then high school was good. We spent a lot of time in a club called AZA, which was for sports and social stuff. It was all Jewish related. Met a lot of very nice people. Dated a lot of very nice people. It was a good life.
So when the Dodgers, was it grammar school, high school? When was the
Yeah, the
affection?
Dodgers moved here when I was 12 or 13 in 1958. I went to a telethon. I was in Little League to bring the Dodgers to LA. I'm sure we were the pivotal influence on bringing the Dodgers here, but I've been a lifelong Dodger fan, as you'll find out. The jersey in back of me is number 32, Sandy Koufax, who has always been a hero of mine. So that is sort of my childhood. I did work since I've been 14 years old. I've never been without a job since I've been 14.
Yeah.
At 16 was the first day. My mom, of course, went to Safeway stores and knew the manager and said, "You got to hire my son." And so Kurt Poliski, who was the manager of the local Safeway store, I think just to get my mom out of his hair. She was a very nice woman, but she was persistent. He hired me as a box boy. I worked for Safeway from the age of 16 all the way through high school, all the way through college, and after I graduated from college, between college and law school. So I worked for them for many years. I started as a box boy, became a checker, and by the end I was a night manager. So I owe Safeway really quite a bit. My parents lived a good life. They got to see their kids grow up. They got to see their grandchildren. My mom passed away in 2005, and my dad in 2010, and they lived wonderful lives.
Now, after you left Westchester High, you stayed on the west side. You went to that school. What's the one up in Westwood? What's that school?
Oh yeah, UCLA. So I basically applied to one school. It was not like it is today. And thankfully I got into UCLA. I graduated on a Friday. In those days, you could graduate in like March. And so I started UCLA on a Monday. And it was really a culture shock. I mean, I was a young 17 when I entered college. And I mean, I was not worldly by any stretch. And I was just at sea for that first semester. And then we'd saved enough money where I could afford 1 year to live in a dorm, because I lived at home the first semester then. So I moved into Dykstra Hall on the UCLA campus, and I met the love of my life, Susan, there. We met by an Apple machine, which is sort of a family lore. We were introduced by a mutual friend.
And when you say an Apple machine, you don't mean an Apple device.
No, that's right. God, 50 years later. No, it was a machine that dispensed apples. You could put in, I don't even know, maybe it was a dime, and an apple would fall out. It's like a vending machine.
Yeah.
We call it the Apple machine. So it's a
Yeah.
it's a real legend.
Young people
in our
can look up
family.
what a vending machine is on the internet.
That's right. So, after that first year, I moved back home, continued to work at Safeway. I helped found, believe it or not, a fraternity at UCLA, which was a national fraternity called Tau Epsilon Phi TEPS, and we founded this chapter. The most illustrious member of our chapter was Joe, the fighter, boxer Joe Lewis's son. That was kind of a big deal on campus. And we founded this chapter, and we had a lot of fun. Still friends with some of my fraternity brothers to this day. We had a good time. I guess my most vivid memory is I don't know if you elected this or not, but you were, I was pledge master, which means I was in charge of the pledges, and I instituted a no hazing policy way before its time. And there was a big letter to the editor by my pledges in the Daily Bruin about how we were the only fraternity on campus with a no hazing policy. And it got a lot of attention. It made me feel really good that they would think enough to actually write that letter. In college, in high school, I met Harvey Levine, who was a very dear friend and continues to be. We were roommates at UCLA. He is just retired as the city attorney of Fremont, California, where he was a huge success. He's a lovely man with a wonderful family, and we are in close contact today.
What was your major?
I majored in political science. I was thinking about what are my takeaways from my classes at UCLA, and there are two. And they both involve teachers. One was a TA for a history class remember her name was Mrs. Neff. And in high school, maybe like a lot of people, it was like all memorization. All you had to do was memorize what happened and when, regurgitate it, and you'd be a big success. You'd probably get an A. Well, when I went to UCLA, they wanted more than that. And I was kind of struggling with it. And so I met with her, at her idea, and said, what do I need to do? And she didn't use these words, but what she meant was critical thinking. She said, look, you're very logical, you're great at memorizing, and you can tell me when events happen, but you need to know why they happen. So after everything that you write, ask why. Why did this happen? What was the cause of this event? What was the aftermath of this event? And why did that happen? Keep asking why. And that was a real lesson that I've taken with me all the way to my present job. And the second was I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And there was a Professor Hobbs at UCLA that had a class called The Supreme Court. And he taught it using the case method. You start with Marbury versus Madison, you just go through all the cases. And I took it as a sophomore. You're not supposed to take that class until you're upper class, but I took it as a sophomore on a dare by a good friend of mine who was really smart and said, we'll both get A's in this class. This Professor Hobbs was famous for only giving like scant A's. And so sure enough, we got 2 of the A's, but I loved the class, and it really made me interested in becoming a lawyer, which I had really not thought of before, just because I enjoyed the process of reading a case, reasoning by analogy, and trying to figure out what the holding was and how it influenced the future. And also between college and law school, I worked for Safeway, but we needed money. Susan and I were going to get married in August of 1968. I graduated again in the spring of '68 from college, and so I took a job with the United States Air Force in the Judge Advocate's office. My brother Gary actually turned me on to this job because he was already working for the Air Force in a civilian job. So I got to work in the Judge Advocate's office, and we did a lot of good work in basically collecting money from lawyers for money that they owed for personal injury actions as reimbursements to the Air Force. But I had a lot of good experience there. I worked at Space and Missile Systems. So I worked from there from like 8 in the morning until I think it was 4 maybe, and then I went to work for Safeway from 6 to midnight.
Wow.
So it was quite a, well, but we were about to get married and had no money. So this was a really good way to make money. And I was living at home, so there was no other overhead. You remember, I think gas was $0.25 a gallon at that point too.
And they gave you free glasses and maps and all kinds of stuff when you get your gas.
That's right, they did.
Then you went on to UCLA Law School, and I know you were very successful there, both on the law review and that you graduated Order of the Coif. But tell us a little bit more about UCLA, your years at UCLA Law School.
They were wonderful years. I actually enjoyed law school more than college, which I know is unusual, I think. Susan and I got married on August 11, 1968. Started law school shortly thereafter. I learned the world was not perfect when I applied to law school because, I'm going to shorten the story, but I only applied to a couple law schools and I hadn't heard from UCLA. And friends of mine who had lower LSATs and lower grades were getting in. And I didn't quite understand that, so I went to the Dean of Admissions and asked him why, and he opened up a little folder and said, "It's because your grades are too low." And I said, I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I said, I'm a little surprised to hear that. And to make a long story short, he opened up the folder and said, "Are these your grades?" And I said, "Those are my grades, but this pencil mark with my grade average, that's not my grade average." And he looked at it and he said, "Well, let me compute it." So he did this, 4 times 3, 3 times 4, maybe some 2s in there. And he says, "Oh, that's a different grade average. Is that your grade average?" I said, "Yeah, that's the right one." So he did it over again, manually. And then he came up with the same numbers the second time. And I said, "Yeah, that's my grade average." And he stood up and he said, "Congratulations, you've just been admitted to UCLA Law School." So I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone in there.
You were like your mother. You asserted yourself and asked the question.
I did. I think I did really well there. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I guess the highlights for me, I was part of the first clinical program at UCLA, so we actually tried cases. I tried a case representing the mother in a dependency case and successfully got the child back to the mother. Appeared in court, everything. We also represented somebody in a civil case. There was a debt collector trying to collect a debt, and we prepared for trial, and we're prepared to go for trial. And we showed up at trial the first day, and the other side wanted a continuance, and we said, "We're ready, Your Honor." And the other side wasn't ready, and the judge said, "You have no grounds for a continuance other than you're not ready. So, no continuance," and that was it. Judgment ended for our client. He couldn't present a case. So I had 2 really good experiences in court, so that was encouraging. Dave Binder was the professor in charge of the program, and we were friends for a long time. Susan was on campus. She actually attended some classes because she was getting her teaching credential at the same time, and she was teaching part-time at what was then Westlake School for Girls. She taught a Spanish class there. Now it's Harvard Westlake, but she taught there, and she made some extra money for us, which was nice. We met lifelong friends at UCLA. We're still really close friends with Paul and Becca Marcus. Paul's had a wonderfully successful career as deans of various law schools. He's now a professor at William & Mary Law School. And Becca is a founder of the Mindfulness Center at William & Mary and very accomplished therapist. We have renewed our friendship with Larry Rubin, who is a fellow justice on the Court of Appeal. He was a classmate of mine, and many other classmates at UCLA we've continued to have friendships with.
You've been active in the Alumni Association too at UCLA, haven't you?
I did. I became president of the Law Alumni Association at UCLA. We became, while I was in law practice, we could afford it, and we were pretty generous donors at UCLA Law School. Our name's on the wall a few places. And they honored me as Alumnus of the Year for community service to the law school. And we've been, active in the law school for a long time. I owe a lot to that school. I got a great education in law school.
So moving on from those golden law school years, law school that you love so much, move on to more your practice years, more reality years. So let's start with your experiences at the Nosserman firm. I think that was your first firm?
Mm-hmm. Well, my charmed life continued, I think is the message for Nosserman. I was, when I was in law school, as I mentioned, after the first year I went back to the Air Force, worked there in the summer. And then the second summer I worked for the Nosserman firm as a summer associate. And it was called, at the time, it was Nosserman, Waters, Scott, Kruger, and Reardon. Nosserman had passed away, but he was a real legend, I guess, in the trust and estates area. Waters, who I'll talk about somewhat here, was a very important politician in California, a leader of people and very prominent in the Republican Party, and later a federal judge. Reardon, of course, is Dick Reardon, who became mayor of Los Angeles. And it was a great, really good small firm with a lot of talented lawyers. I became so fortunate there. I started work for Richard Mainland, who became my mentor. He was a classic mentor in the sense that we became close with Richard, and known as Dick then, but now Richard and his wife Jan and their family, and they became close with Susan and I, and I guess it's Susan and me. But he taught me so much. We would sit at his desk and we would craft every paper we drafted. He was a wonderful writer, very precise, very well organized. And we would talk about what the message were and how to write it and what was the most persuasive way to do it. He was also extraordinarily honest with his clients and with the court and with his colleagues. He just was a straight arrow, brilliant mind, Harvard Law School, the whole 9 yards, and just a wonderful man and a great example. We had one big antitrust case that we worked on. We worked on a lot of cases, but the most memorable one was an antitrust case over, of all things, kitty litter, which is basically sand ground up. And we had a 6-week bench trial before Judge Pragerson in Los Angeles, which at the time was the longest bench trial in the history of the Central District. And we were there for 6 weeks. He started every morning. Pragerson had an interesting way of doing things. He started every morning at 8:15, and we went straight through to like 1:15 or 2 without a break.
Wow.
And then he would do his afternoon calendar. But we did that for 6 weeks. I learned a lot in that case. We actually lost our case as plaintiff and won on a counterclaim. But one of the things I learned as a judge, because I now as a judge I think of this moment, Judge Pragerson, he's passed away now obviously, but he was a legend there. He's a former Marine. He had a real twinkle in his eye, and I really liked him even though we lost. But the other side won the case on what was a view, and we went to 2 kitty litter plants, ours and the other side's, and I was the guide for Judge Pragerson, so I led him through the hills of Maricopa County, and we lost that day because the other side's plant was very efficient, state of the art, and our plant could only be described as a Rube Goldberg concoction with pulleys and all that stuff. And the other thing I remember about him is he made a ruling from the bench, and this is what I remember as a judge. He made a ruling from the bench that I just thought was haywire, and I made a face. And at this point, you really know the lawyers, right? So he looked right at me and just said, "Mr. Fybel, obviously you disagree with my ruling. Tomorrow morning, I would like a brief on my desk explaining to me why you disagree with my ruling and what the correct ruling would be."
This may explain why many times we've had students visit the courthouse and you've told them from the bench after we're finished tidbits, pearls of wisdom, and you've said, don't show a reaction to the judge's ruling. If you disagree with it, don't make a face, don't shrug, don't roll your eyes. Not a good practice.
I learned that lesson in the mid-'70s, and man, it stuck with me because I was a victim of it. I've never done that again in all my practice. And then I worked with Lofton Waters, who was one of the greatest men I've ever had the privilege to work with. You can look him up, as they say, Laughlin E. Waters. He's a World War II hero. If you read Citizen Soldier by Stephen Ambrose, Mr. Waters is in that book. Susan and I, as a tribute to him, traveled to Jambois, France, which is a little town where he was the Captain Waters, where there's a monument to him, because he led the Allied forces in shutting off the German retreat after D-Day. There's not a monument to Eisenhower there. There's not a monument to Patton. There's a monument to Mr. Waters. And we met some locals there, and he would go back for all the reunions. My wonderful memory of him is, I guess 6 weeks is a common denominator, but we had a 6-week jury trial where he was the first chair and I was the second chair right here in Orange County in 1973. And we represent Stop and Go Markets, which was being sued by a bunch of franchisees. And we just had two franchisees, two sets of franchisees in our case, but the courtroom was filled with other franchisees who were going to piggyback on whatever victory these people achieved. And I learned so much about how to try a case from him. And he gave me so much responsibility. I mean, this was 1973, so I was fresh out of law school. I graduated in 71. And he just gave me witnesses to do, arguments to make, motions to argue. I mean, we won that case, jury verdict. And then there were some other claims the judge dismissed, and it was a complete victory. But watching him deal with settlement negotiations, he couldn't have been more straightforward than he was to the other side. These are our strengths, these are our weaknesses, this is our offer. He was a very brave, honorable man.
Was Judge Waters a partner who invited you to have dinner at an establishment in Los Angeles?
Yeah, he was.
That's a good story.
It's a good story.
It's a very inspirational story, I think.
At the time, thank you. At the time, this case was going on, again, I was brand new. I was still very young and inexperienced in the life of the law and in business. But there were clubs in Los Angeles, the California Club and the Jonathan Club, that discriminated against pretty much everybody. Women, Jews, anyone of color, you kind of name it. It was white males only of a certain religion. And he was a member. He was a member because that's how you got business in Los Angeles. And we met right before the trial started in his office, and he had this big desk, I think they call it a lawyer's desk. Anyway, he said, okay, this is our schedule. We'll meet here at 6:15 a.m. And we'll go over what we're going to do. We'll get a witness in here. Then we'll drive to Orange County. We'll try to beat the traffic a little bit. And then we'll do our cases, and then we'll probably bring a witness back. And we'll go to dinner at the California Club. We'll come back. We'll work some more, probably till 11 or 12, and then we'll do the whole thing again tomorrow. And I just looked at him and I said, Mr. Waters, I called him at that point, I'll do all of that, except one thing. I said, I won't go to the California Club for dinner with you. You can go. I'll just get some takeout or something. There's a restaurant in our building. And he didn't miss a beat. He just looked at me. He knew why I wouldn't go. And he just looked at me and said, then we won't go to the California Club. We'll have dinner brought in from somewhere. That was it. And I learned a lot from that. And I would have done anything for him at that point, because I was going to have to quit. If he said, no, you have to go, I was like, I can't do this. So it was a real momentous thing for me at the time. The other person at the Naacp firm who I think really influenced my life was Chuck Vogel. He was a LA Superior Court judge who retired, and then he joined the Naacp firm. You got a sense of his sense of humor when in our first meeting we were sitting around the partnership table, the first partnership meeting Chuck attended, and people said, well, what do we call you? Do we call you Judge? Do we call you Chuck? Do we call you Mr. Vogel? What are we supposed to call you now that you're here? He straightest face you could ever have. He just said, I think Your Honor would be fine. And of course that broke the ice. But the way he influenced me, he became president of the LA County Bar Association. And of course he had to form committees, and he had to appoint committee chairs, and he had to do all this work. So Chuck just walked into my office one day and said, okay, what committee are you going to be on? I said, I never thought about that. This kind of changed my life when I tell you what the committee was. So he said, what committee do you want to be on? I said, I don't know. What do you think the choices are? He says, here's the list. Look at this. And then I saw this committee called Professional Responsibility and Ethics for Lawyers. And I said, I want to be on that committee. So Chuck appointed me. There's a continuing theme here. So Chuck appointed me to that committee. Over time, I became chair of that committee in Los Angeles and became very experienced in lawyer ethics. We wrote opinions. We answered questions. It was a very active committee, and I was on it, for several years as chair and then past chair. So it was I worked with a lot of great lawyers at the Naacp firm. Really kind of too numerous to mention. I almost went out on my own practicing law with Carl McKenzie. It was going to be, he wanted to be Fybel and McKenzie, and I wanted to be McKenzie and Fybel. And then I opted out at the last minute because I had a very young family and no money. So I decided not to take the risk. And then he went out and it became Reardon and McKenzie, which became a very successful firm. One story about Dick Reardon, again, and I'll close on the Naacp. Just to give you an idea of what kind of a person Dick was, which was terrific to me anyway, and to many other people. When I first started there, it was on my first week there, and my office was basically next to Dick Reardon's. I'm not quite sure why. I was in litigation, and he was, the big corporate lawyer. And Dick just walked into my office, sat down, and said, I want to go over your finances with you. I said, what? He says, yeah, tell me what your budget is. So I told him, well, we pay this much for rent, which is, I think, $145 a month. We have, this is for our cars. This is, we're going to start a family. The whole, I gave him my whole budget. I don't know why he was doing this, but he was Dick Reardon, so I answered the question. So he looked at me and says, well, we don't pay you enough. We're going to change that. And the next day, they upped the salaries for all first-year associates. That was just him.
Because it was the right thing to do.
It was the right thing to do, and he was interested, he was engaged. So Susan always teases me because Dick is one of the only two Republicans I've ever voted for. And I voted for mayor because I thought he's a great man of character.
You left Naacp and you went on to Morrison Foerster, known as MoFo, and there you took a different role. I mean, you were a partner, but then you also took on management roles at Morrison. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your MoFo experience?
Thank you. You're doing a great job as an interviewer, by the way. Thank you.
I'm doing my best.
Well, I was with Morrison Foerster from 1981 to 2000. I had, as I mentioned, been an Naacp from 71 to 81 as a summer associate, and then partner. And I joined Morrison Foerster as a partner in 1981. It was really an opportunity for me. It was, the LA office of Morrison Foerster had 13 lawyers. It was obviously an international law firm, but the LA office was very small, and they had some stumbles along the way. So they brought a partner from San Francisco whose name was Haley Fromholz, who was the leader of that office and a great man. He became the managing partner of the LA office, and his charge was to move from San Francisco and really grow the office. And he persuaded me this was a leap of faith worth taking, that Morrison Foerster was a meritocracy, that you rose or you fell not on seniority, but on the job you did. And their values were very close to mine in terms of equality and non-discrimination and work in the community, and they encouraged pro bono work. And it was just, to me, it was the right firm at the right time. And he said, it's unlimited what you can accomplish here. And I still remember the meeting with Haley and again, just taking the leap of faith. This was the right thing to do, even though I left a firm that was very, very good to me. And I had a lot of friends there. But I just decided this was the right thing for me and my family and for my career. And it obviously turned out to be a great decision. In terms of I'll talk about practice first a little bit, and then the management. First of all, the practice continued to be all civil business litigation. That's all it was. There was no criminal work, no personal injuries, all civil business litigation. I was really fortunate there in attracting and retaining clients. I got a lot of business from former opposing counsel who I was up against, and then when the case was over, they would refer cases to me. I got a major client, First Interstate Bank, because I opposed them on a case, and when the case was over, their head litigation counsel called me up as soon as the case was over. He called me up. He said, "Can you come over here to the bank? I want to talk to you." And it was just, his name is Peter Whelan, and he said, "We were impressed with the work you did, and we want to hire you." And they hired me over many years until First Interstate was acquired by Wells Fargo. But I did really high-level stuff for them that never made the papers and never made a lawsuit. I counseled them on what they consider to be important matters, and especially on employment issues. And then I represented them on several employment cases, which were pretty high profile at the time. And we used your old friend Jack Trotter as our mediator over at JAMS when that started. But I had a very, when I started out, it was a little surprising to me and to everybody else. They had hired me to be, not to be derogatory, to be sort of a service partner to help them with Crocker Bank, because they had a lot of Crocker work and not enough people to do it. And I quickly had a practice built without working for Crocker, even though in the end I ended up doing a lot of work for them. But that was kind of a surprise. I think that, again, the practice highlights for me, I kind of try to identify them over the years at Morrison. One was the jury trial. We represented a nonprofit museum that had an insurance claim against an insurance company and a broker for, they had a theft of a major exhibit, Netsky exhibit, with small Japanese figurines, and it was stolen, and their insurance company denied coverage. And basically their defense was pound sand. They were not interested in paying the museum anything. I don't think we ever got a settlement offer from them. And so and it was a contingency case, which for Morrison, we never took contingency cases. But we took this one. It was kind of the right thing to do, and we won. It was, again, I don't know why these things always take 6 weeks, but it was a 6-week jury trial, and we won, and it was just glorious. It was just glorious. And then we had the cross-examination of this is sort of the highlight of my negotiation skill, I think. We won this big jury verdict. We got everything. Got attorneys, we got the money for the exhibit. We got general damages. We got attorney's fees. We got punitive damages. We had this very nice verdict that made our client more than whole and more than enough money for us out of contingency. And so the insurance company after the trial was over, they fired the trial lawyer, and then they hired O'Melveny. And I had gone up against O'Melveny many, many times, won some, lost some. They're great lawyers, in my experience. In fact, I copied some of the writing style from the cat litter case, the way they organized their briefs. I thought imitations of flattery, right? So anyway, they called us into this big meeting on O'Melveny. They must have had 10 lawyers there. They must have, their client was there, everybody was there. And and I walked in with my client and one other lawyer. And they talked at us for 45 minutes about how they had a great case and they were going to appeal and we were going to get nothing. and we should take pennies on the dollar. It was pretty brutal. And I decided, I'm not going to say anything. And so I said, okay, we heard you. Thank you very much. I went back to my office. I called the lead Melanie partner. He became a judge ultimately, by the way. I said, you want to meet me? Their office was in one tower. We were in another tower, right next door to each other. And I said, why don't you meet me in the plaza or in my office? He said, I'll come to your office. So I got a little conference room. I said, by the way, did you ever see the examination, the cross-examination of your client? And he said, no, I've never seen it. The trial lawyers didn't have dailies. I said, I have a copy for you of the cross-examination. I want you to read it, take it home with you, and this is the amount we're willing to sell for. No negotiation. This is it. Because I could start higher if you want, and then you could start lower, and then we could meet in the middle. But this is a number. It makes sense. Read the cross-examination. Rethink what you said to me this morning, and let me know what you think. You took it. It was brutal. I mean, the guy, to give you an example, the test for punitive damages is basically a conscious decision to disregard the rights of the victim. That's the standard. So in the cross-examination, in trial, I asked him, did you make a conscious decision not to consider the response of the museum to your questions? Yes. So I said, that was just a sample.
Yeah.
And so he took it, he came back about, that after, it was either that, the next morning, I think, actually. He called me up and said, I've read it, we accept. That's it. So that was, we felt pretty good about that. Later on, I became special litigation counsel for Federated Stores, which is Bloomingdale's, Macy's, all that. That came from a referral, kind of a combined referral, one to Bob Raven, who was the chairman of Morrison & Foerster for many years, and to me is from an opposing counsel. And that was the biggest bankruptcy in the history of the United States for a retail operation. And represented them. It was all the case. I saw a lot of Cincinnati where the case was litigated, and a lot of New York because a lot of the banks that we owed money to were in New York, and a lot of the witnesses were in New York. But it was Bruce Bennett, who was the lead lawyer, was great at settling that case for a lot of money. There was $1 billion at stake at the time. The other case that I want to talk about briefly was we represented a company called Platinum Technology. Actually, this case was referred by the litigation counsel for Federated Stores because they were in Cincinnati. Platinum was based in Chicago. They needed a lawyer in Los Angeles. And so I was hired by Platinum, which turned out to be a great representation. There's good news and bad news with that representation. The good news is a wonderful client, tough case. We did really well. The bad news is our opposing counsel was opposing counsel from hell, as far as we were concerned. The long and the short of that one is we got a call from Platinum saying, we were going to trial. I had an apartment rented we were living in Orange County at that point. I had an apartment rented in downtown Los Angeles. We were ready to go to trial. We had all our technology ready to go, all our exhibits. In federal court, it was in federal court, so all the pretrial stuff was done. All the exhibits were labeled. All the snippets from the depositions were, we were ready to go. And I got a call like the week before trial, and the client tells me, we just got an offer to be acquired in the largest software acquisition in the history of the world, basically, and certainly in the country. And we have to sell this case. That's a condition of the sale. It's like, okay, we have an opposing counsel who has no interest in settling. They're doing everything they can to not settle. I said, but your general counsel, they have a general counsel. As long as I don't script it, you can talk to the general counsel and see if you can settle it. I can't do it. I can't go to him, and I certainly can't opposing counsel will do everything they can to put the kibosh on this. And we were the plaintiffs in that case. We also owed, there was a counterclaim. We had actually owed them money, as it turned out, but we knew that going in. But we wanted to be the first to the courthouse. So anyway, long and the short of it is, he settled the case. We're documenting it. The other side tried to do everything they can to not have it settled, because we were dealing with computer equipment all over the world, and security interest in it and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, the case settled. And I've always wanted to be a fly on the wall. And that went because we settled, we documented it, we closed, and the next day, the headline of the Wall Street Journal was the acquisition of our client. Headline. And it was like, if that headline had come, first of all, they wouldn't have closed without our case settling. But, we paid a premium for the case knowingly, but boy, that premium would have gone up a lot if the other side knew about, the potential acquisition. But it was great. And then the other thing about practice, I do want to mention that I worked very closely with Shirley Hufstedler, who was a genius and a very kind woman. She, as anybody watching this will know, Shirley was a Court of Appeal justice. She was a Ninth Circuit judge. She was the first Secretary of Education of the United States. If Jimmy Carter was reelected, she would have been the first woman on the Supreme Court of the United States. And I got the privilege of practicing with her. She was the best writer I've ever worked with. She wrote better than anyone I've ever read. The funny story about her and my mom are that I'd always told my mom, which is true, that she was the smartest person I'd ever met. And I came home one day, we were dinner at my parents' house, and I was working with Shirley, and I said something like, "Oh my God, she's just the smartest person." And my mom said, "Wait a minute, I thought I was the smartest person." And I said, "Oh," I had to quickly pivot. And I said, "Well, actually, she's the smartest lawyer I've ever met. You're the smartest person."
Good recovery.
It was really on the spot. But I want to give homage to her. She spoke for me in my enrobing on the Court of Appeal, and was very instrumental in my getting appointed in the first place to the Superior Court. And you asked me about management, which was the question I was supposed to be answering. So
we're not in court. You can be non-responsive.
Okay. So in management, I had quite a journey, quite a ride at Morrison. When I got there, again, I only had 13 lawyers, and we had to grow. And I had a lot of it. I was the chairman of the hiring committee at Naacp, and they kind of knew that, and they knew I had some experience in hiring. So after a little while, they named me to the hiring committee of the firm, and I actually do know what I'm talking about in hiring. So they quickly named me hiring partner at the Los Angeles office of Morrison for associates. And we did a really good job. One of the things that I told them was that this office is non-competitive in the law schools that we're hiring from. The firm was hiring from in other offices, Harvard, Yale. You get the picture. And I said, and you also have no minorities to speak of in the firm. So you can solve that problem by starting a first-year program at Harvard and Yale and hiring and focusing on minority lawyers as first years. And you may not be able to keep them, but they'll be ambassadors for you when they go back to school, and you'll be able to hire people for the second year from Harvard and Yale. And I'll also remember the partnership meeting. Carl Leonard was the chair, and the partnership meeting was in the hiring committee meeting was in January or February. And Carl, who I'll talk about a little later, I'll never forget it. So, that's a great idea. It's February, Boston, cold, snow, ice. Rich, you go. You do that. And so I did. And we ended up hiring some amazing African-American women. And as first years, and we continued to do that. It was a real success story because some of them actually ended up at MoFo permanently, and some went back and sang our praises And we ended up hiring a lot of people from then on, from those two schools, as well as, you know, many other schools. But we became competitive, and served a purpose at that point. Haley Fromholz was the managing partner of LA. And then in 1988, I guess he decided to step down as managing partner, so they needed another one. And management of the firm, so kind of shows you how people have been so kind. The management of the firm wanted to choose a person I'm still friends with, a man named Alan Benjamin, because he'd been there the longest. He started as an associate in the LA office. He was the longest serving member of the office. He was a very successful corporate lawyer. And they approached him and said, "We want you to be managing partner." And he said, "You made the wrong choice." Can you imagine that? He said, "Rich Fybel should be managing partner. He's the one that's going to have the support of everybody in this office. And, you know, he's just more experienced than I am, and that's the right choice." And being management, they didn't want to take him at his word, so they interviewed everybody in the office. And they came back and said, "Okay, they approached me and said, 'Do you want to be managing partner?' I said, 'Yes,' because I had a lot of ideas on, again, how to manage and how to grow the office. And I was managing partner of the office from 1988 to 1992. And we did a really good job. We grew to 138 lawyers. We negotiated a new deal at another bank tower, built out new offices. I'll brag a little bit. We were recognized. One of the things I wanted to do was get Morrison & Foerster's LA office in the community, get known in the community, do pro bono work, get things accomplished. And when people thought about who to hire, they would think of us, along with the other leading firms in LA. And we won one of the first awards, the LA Women Lawyers, for our promotion of women. I'll always be grateful to Lori Zelon, who was my partner at Morrison and is now a retired appellate justice, who will soon be serving here as a pro tem, thanks to Justice O'Leary. We went to this big gala award dinner, and they called Lori up to accept the award from LA Women Lawyers because of what we had accomplished in the hiring and promotion, frankly, as partners of women lawyers. And Lori stood up on the stage and she said, "I'm not the one that should accept this award." And she called me up to accept the award, which I'll always remember. That was generosity of Lori.
So Lori.
We also got the first ever award from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for our work in housing discrimination. We represented would-be tenants who were discriminated against by landlords. We won their award. We also won the Public Counsel Law Firm of the Year award. I got to accept that. I never really knew that when you stand on a stage like that in a big auditorium, I think it was the Beverly Hilton, there are these bright lights, you can't see a thing. So I gave a speech. I have no idea who I was talking to, other than there were a lot of people in the room.
Sometimes that's comforting.
Yeah.
You can't see those people, those intimidating eyes out there.
Yeah, so the management in those years was great, but I was also building a practice. I mean, you know, Federated was in those years, and so it was a lot of work for First Interstate, and I had a lot of other clients. A lot of clients I got along with really well were from the Midwest, Chicago, Cincinnati. Hayworth was based as a furniture manufacturer. They used to make they used to sell the Eames chair before Herman Miller did. Hayworth invented cubicles where you had the electronics in the walls of the cubicles. It was a wonderful company based in Michigan, Holland, Michigan, and did a lot of work for them throughout the United States and in California.
Well, I'm really glad for all those management years you spent, because I call on you as a resource in my management role, because you do have the view of the whole organization. We tend, judges and lawyers, to have a sort of a myopic view of what affects me personally. And so you do think of the entire organization, not just one person. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate the confidence you've shown in me over the years. So I was managing partner from 88 to 92, and then in 92 I got a call from the then chairman, Carl Leonard, who said, what do you think about joining senior management? There was basically 4 or 5 people that, what's called the small manager group, that ran the firm. And I became the managing partner firm-wide for attorney personnel, which meant I was in charge of policies and hiring for associates and partners, firm-wide internationally, and part of the small management group. So I stepped down as managing partner of the LA office and went into senior management. Throughout all this time, I was a member of the points committee, which is the compensation committee. So I had a lot of responsibility that I try to fulfill, honestly, and well. So I was in senior management until Carl stepped down as chair and Peter Pfister took over. I was still for a little while with Peter. I'm still friends with both Carl and Peter to this day. We still exchange emails and talk on the phone, and they're both really wonderful people, great leaders of Morrison & Foerster. They really led the firm, and not just to grow, but to hire good people and to do good works in the community. And I was on the managing committee through 1996. And then Susan and I decided, kids were out of the house. My commute was still from Palos Verdes to LA. We started thinking of moving someplace. Maybe we didn't really know if we were going to move closer to LA or move somewhere else. And I'll talk about. We ultimately moved, of course, to Orange County, into the Orange County office. I was recruited by Dean Zipser, who was the managing partner a long time of Morrison's Orange County office. I'm looking back at my Morrison days, and I do want to say one thing which I touched on, which is, I think, one of the things I'm most proud of is my mentorship and close association with women, the lawyers at Morrison. Many women made partner under my working with me. Just to name a smidgen, Beth Cranston was my right hand for many, many years, and I interviewed at UCLA. As she finally remembered, she wore jeans to the interview because she didn't think it was going to be an interview. She was just going to sign up, and then I saw her and we talked, and the rest is history. And she was a partner, worked with her on many cases, traveled with her. She's now the director. She was general counsel, now the director of the Rape Treatment Center in UCLA Hospital. Just a crowning achievement, just such good work. I'm going to talk later. I'm going to get too emotional if I talk about it now. But when I refer to donors later, she was a volunteer donor for me. We're dear friends.
Well, we've talked a lot about your practice years, and you've talked a lot about all the other. You give kudos to everybody, but we want to focus on you. And as you went onto the bench, I know practice years were great, but I also think your years on the bench have been pretty special.
Yeah.
And they started at North Court in in a criminal assignment, which was to call it a sea change from what you've been doing, the successful civil litigator, managing partner, management team, and now you are Judge Fybel at North Court. And did you start on an arraignment calendar or criminal trials or something to do with criminal, I think?
It was quite an experience, I hadn't really thought about becoming a judge, but after the Platinum case settled, I went on a roots trip with my parents, and we went to my mother would never set foot in Lithuania again, but my father wanted to go back to his little town in the Harz Mountains, Osterode, and so I went with my brothers and my parents. And Susan joined us later, but we went on a roots trip. We went to Osterode, and it really hit home. I mean, we were greeted as celebrities in Osterode because the town believed, and their town history is they saved the Fybel family. That's their town history. That's it.
Yeah.
And so we were greeted by the mayor, everybody. But it really, I said, you know, maybe I keep giving lip service to we owe this country, America, so much. Maybe I should do something about it. And so I decided I wanted to go into public service. And Tom Umberg, who was in and out of public service for years, was a partner at Morrison. I hired Tom Umberg at Morrison, by the way, which I never let him forget. And he never let me forget it, because the first time I interviewed him, I sent him a rejection letter, and he still has it. But Tom gave me good advice on where to apply. And so I applied to be a Superior Court judge, and thanks to Tom and to Shirley and a few other people, Bert Pines.
Governor Davis.
I was going to say Bert Pines is appointment secretary, and Governor Davis did appoint me. And I'm very grateful to Governor Davis and to Bert Pines for getting me appointed and appointing me. And I did go to North Court, which I think they picked because it was the furthest from my house. But it was funny at the time. Justice O'Leary is very experienced in administration of courts, and I think at the time, word on the street was, oh, North Court, that's the furthest. It's the old municipal court. It's limited jurisdiction. Blah blah blah. You're kind of being sent there. I didn't know anything, so I go to North Court, and it was in a way it was kind of like heaven for me.
There were some great judges up there at that time.
There were such great judges. Now, the first 6 weeks were not a lot of fun, because as you point out, at Morrison, and as a litigator, I was always the most prepared one in the room. I'm not saying I was the smartest one in the room, but I was pretty good, but I was the most prepared. I mean, I knew what was going to happen and why. I go to North Court, I was the least prepared person in the room. The DAs, the PDs, the criminal defense lawyers, the clerks, some of the defendants knew more about the system than I did. I mean, it was a crash course. The first 6 weeks, people would come up to me, especially Mike Hayes, who I'll talk about, but he was a supervising judge at the time, and he'd say, "Isn't this the greatest job in the world?" And I would think to myself, actually, no. The managing partner of the Morrison and Forster office, that was the best job in the world. But after about 6 weeks, I kind of got the hang of it. I had some events there. My enrobing hasn't come across yet, but you can see it over my right shoulder, which is the jersey of Sandy Koufax, who's my hero, who refused to play in the World Series on Yom Kippur, the greatest Dodger pitcher, probably the greatest pitcher of all time. But I was always a Dodger fan, and we met Maury Wills at a charity function that my brother Kirk hosted, and Gary Kirk and I spent a lot of time with Maury, and he came to my enrobing. So in my enrobing, I was not the center of attention. The Dodger great Maury Wills was.
When I got sworn into the West Municipal Court in 1981, the person that said the Pledge of Allegiance at my swearing in was Jerry Royce, a pitcher for the Dodgers, and they had just won the World Series.
You had the same experience I did.
So it was, nobody cared about me. We get Jerry Royce's autograph.
My colleagues there were spectacular. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but in addition to Mike Hayes, who was supervising judge, there was Cormac Carney, Rick King, Derek Johnson, the late Jimmy Marion. If you ever went in a foxhole and needed somebody to defend you, you would look to Jimmy Marion and Pat Donahue. They were just terrific. I remember we used to go to Caro's every day for lunch, which is a short walk. And I said one day at lunch, Sarah Jones was there and a few other people, and we would sit around, we all go to lunch every day together, probably have the same thing. And I looked around the table at these guys and I said, I've never been around people like you. You guys are amazing. You're just wonderful people. And you take this job so seriously, and you're teaching me so much. It's just amazing that we're all here. And Pat Donahue looked at me and said, I've been in the Orange County courts for, I think at that point, 15, 20 years, something like that. He said, I've been around a lot. I've been with a lot of people, DAs, judges, PDs, everything. this will never happen again. This is unique, to have an experience with these people that you just are so fond of, and everybody respects each other and likes each other. It was a great experience. I also really appreciate the lawyers there, especially the young PDs and DAs. We were learning together. The one thing I remember especially is that I didn't know anything. So I got the CEB book, which was a soft-bound, very thick, vanilla cover, criminal law and procedure. And I had it on the bench. It was a bench book, and I guess it was appropriate to be on the bench. And I would use it. So they would cite some jargon, which all they used was jargon, numbers and jargon. I would look it up. I'd say, okay, what's the code section? What's the case name? What's the site if you can get it? You know, what's the motion you want to make? And I would look it up on the bench. And I would just do that. And so soon, sure enough, the young PDs and the young DAs suddenly appeared with the same book on their desks. We had a great relationship. And then I went, you know, I had my assignments there. I was in, you know, I started out in trials and arraignments, and then trials and pre-trials. I did master calendar misdemeanors, which was really interesting for me, assigning cases out. And I really lobbied at the time to be in criminal, not civil. I didn't think I could. I didn't think I could advance my knowledge. I guess it was a bit selfish, but I really wanted to do criminal, and so I was put in felony arraignments, which is basically felony arraignments and plea bargaining. And I learned so much in that department because, you know, I had to go through all these the counts and what was the evidence and what should he or she plead guilty to, and how long should the sentence be. And I had a lot of experience in that. I think the one thing that I remember, Jimmy Marion started it, but then I continued it, which was the misdemeanor domestic violence calendar, where we actually were counselors to these couples that just, it was misdemeanor stuff, it was not felony conduct, but they just couldn't get the concept that you don't hit each other, you don't abuse each other. But they weren't lost, they just needed some help. And they were in this calendar, we would talk to them, I would have conversations with them. So one day my parents came just to watch me on my job, so they watched the whole day. And at the end I said, you know, hey, Mom and Dad, what do you think? And my dad said, you know what? All those years of being a lawyer, that didn't prepare you for this job. What prepared you for this job is working at Safeway, dealing with the public and dealing with people, just everyday people, and talking to them. And he was right.
That's really who you deal with in limited jurisdiction assignments, real people with real problems.
Yeah, it was a great, North Court is very fond memories.
Before we talk about the Court of Appeal, I'm going to kind of take a detour. And I know this happened a little after you started with the Court of Appeal, but there's another topic that's near and dear to your heart. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, ethics and judicial ethics in particular. And you've been the chair of the California Supreme Court's Advisory Committee on the Code of Judicial Ethics since 2004. You co-authored the 4th edition of the California Judicial Conduct Handbook, which is the Bible for judges. When we want to know about answer an ethical question, we go to that book. And you were chair of the California Supreme Court Committee responsible for recommending the structure and the rules for the Supreme Court Committee on Judicial Ethics Opinion. So it's been I don't want to say a hobby because that might be a little demeaning, but it's been an area of special interest to you. So I'm probably missing some of the things you've done, but why judicial ethics, and how did you get to be a statewide, if not a national expert in judicial ethics?
Well, it all started, with my work, on the LA County Bar Committee on Professional Responsibility. And that helped because in 2002, Justice Vogel was the chair of the Supreme Court Advisory Committee on the Code of Judicial Ethics, which is the committee that advises the Supreme Court on what should be in the Code of Judicial Ethics and what should not be in, and what are necessary amendments. And they need another member, a justice. And Chuck had remembered that I had this experience in ethics, and I've talked to the chief's principal attorney since they wanted someone with experience in ethics. And I just became a justice on the Court of Appeal in 2002, and Chuck remembered me and remembered my experience and recommended me to the chief, and Chief Justice Ron George appointed me in 2002. So I got to work there, and then when Chuck retired from the bench in 2004, he once again recommended me to be chair, and I was appointed chair in 2004. And it's to me, important work to provide judges with the rules. It's not an aspirational code of ethics. In other words, it's not what you should do, it's what you must do. So it's a disciplinary code, and we keep that in mind when we make recommendations to the Supreme Court. Over the years, I've worked with some really, really good people on the committee, and it's been a small committee, maybe with 7 or 8 or 9 members. Over the years, we were assisted till his retirement recently by Mark Jacobson. We've done some important work. I try to, again, pick 2 or 3 things in terms of recommending to the court. I think our most public achievement was there was a rule that said that judges could belong to nonprofits that discriminated on the basis of sexual orientation or other things, and otherwise known as the Boy Scout exception. And we recommended to the court that it be eliminated. That there be no exception. Judges cannot belong to any organization that discriminates. And the court agreed, and so that was implemented. We've also strengthened the code in many other areas dealing with discrimination in the courtroom itself, and judges' responsibilities to correct that. There's also we implemented a rule, recommended a rule against sexual harassment by judges, that was a disciplinary offense. And then most recently, the last one I'll talk about is recommended rules for judicial elections, both in terms of fundraising and reporting of fundraising disclosure, as well as what judges could and couldn't say in the judicial election process. Not just the judges who are running for office, but judges who supported or opposed them. I even have, I guess this is my prop.
It's your book.
It's my book. This is
the Bible. We call it the Bible.
It's a handbook. Thank you. Well, I got to work, with David Rothman, which, again, I get these phone calls. David called me one day and said, on the 4th edition, this California Justice Association was the sponsor of this and the funder, and they wanted the 4th edition, and he asked me would I be the lead author. And I said, yeah, if you still review it and make sure we don't make any mistakes. And then we asked Judge McLaren and Mark Jacobson to work on it. It was published in 2017, and we worked for 3 years on this book. I'm very, very proud of it.
What I think is so helpful about both your writings and also the classes that you teach in ethics are the practical examples, the hypotheticals, because I think as judges, if you ask us, are we fair, are we impartial, are we ethical, we'd all say, sure we are. But then you bring it to life in a hypothetical, and I think, some eyes sort of, the light bulb goes on for some people in the audience thinking, oh gosh, I guess that could be perceived as something short of being ethical. So
right, and I also use that knowledge in another area, which I taught for 8 years at the Whitkin Judicial College with now the late, great Judge Beverly O'Connell. She was a Morrison and Forster lawyer, and then went on the Superior Court and then the Federal Court. Dear friend of mine. They asked me to teach this course on making a record in the Judicial College, and they said you could choose any Superior Court judge in the state to teach it with. So I chose Bev, and we taught for 8 years. Just briefly, it started out as a 45-minute course on the last afternoon of a 2-week college. You can imagine how many people attended that.
Yeah, but you did okay at North Court. I mean, you're used to tough challenges.
That's right. Well, by the middle of maybe by the second or third year of teaching it, it became a 3.5-hour course plenary session. Everyone had a mandatory attend. After the speeches, the chief's welcome speech, it became the first class of every 2-week session. And then after she passed away, I really couldn't do it without her. So I just turned it over to somebody else. But that was a real privilege to teach at the college. And we used a lot of the ethics examples that you mentioned we used in that course. It was really how to be a judge. It was called how to make a record, but it was really how to be a judge.
Another area of expertise that you have is with respect to the Holocaust and how the courts really failed Germany during those years. And I know that's an important subject to you, and I suspect part of it comes from how fortunate and blessed your parents were to have escaped some of the horrors in Eastern Europe. But the Nazi years were such a dark period in world history, and so many Jews lost their lives, and very different experience in your family. And I know we should never forget. So it's one thing to remember, but it's, I think, an entirely different thing to be as active as you are in conveying the message and educating people. And maybe talk a little bit about what you've done to educate people about the atrocities of the Holocaust.
Thank you. Well, you're right about the family history, and it was an intersection with that and judicial ethics that caused my interest. It was like, how could a Western civilized country in the 20th century, how could this happen? And then I focused on the judges and lawyers, because I was a judge and a former lawyer. And I really became interested in the system. And I started speaking and writing about it. And then Catherine Darmer, who was a professor at Chapman Law School, came up to me one day and said, you're speaking and you're writing little stuff about this. I'm gonna edit a book. You want to co-edit it with me? And you can write a chapter on this. You can actually write down. So the long and the short of it is I agreed to do that. And in 2011, we published a book called National Security, Civil Liberties and the War on Terror, and I got to write my chapter. And I wrote a chapter on the German legal system, and the book was published. And then that sort of, people started to see that, and you're right, I've spoken about it probably maybe 20 or 30 times across California to lawyers, judges, citizens groups, you name it, I've spoken to them. All over the state. I think two highlights. One, for some reason, Sacramento likes different people in Sacramento. I've spoken to everything from the Reuben Clark Society to the Holocaust Center in Sacramento that does great work, to judges and lawyers there. And another highlight was the California Judicial Association did a trip to Nuremberg in 2015, and I got to give the keynote speech in courtroom 600 in Nuremberg, which was the courtroom where the Nuremberg trials were held, and I got to give a speech there. If you think I talk a lot now, I did not want to leave that lecture. It was awesome to be in that courtroom to give that speech. And Susan and I became board members of the Rogers Center for Holocaust Education at Chapman University, working with the director Marilyn Herron there. And they do great work in terms of education. I got into this because in 2005, Michael Basler, who was another former Morrison lawyer, who teaches Holocaust genocide and law at various law schools, said, hey, you want to co-teach this class with me? So I co-taught that class with Michael from 2005 to 2018 at Chapman Law School. And so the teaching, the writing, the speaking, I just think it's important to get the message across to people. The judges, we say impartiality, we say independence from politics, but that can go horribly wrong if we let ourselves be controlled by an executive or by political leaders. We do have to follow the Constitution and a Chief Justice. And, in terms of, I get more than I give out of this one because I became known to, I think, Professor Elie Wiesel, Nobel laureate, who would come to Chapman every year for 5 years, and he taught our class at Chapman. I sat next to him when he taught our class. I had many conversations with him, dinners with him. I moderated, discussions where he was the speaker and I was the moderator. I got to know him really, really well. Such wisdom that he had, and he was like my mom, though. He answered every question with a question. My mom would always, you would ask her a question, she would answer with a question. Same thing with Professor Wiesel. I teased him about that. And the last thing about him is, you never know, right? So one of the last times I saw him, and I went up to him, and I always reintroduced myself to him, because you never know, you meet so many people. And I went up to him, I said, Professor Wiesel, I introduced myself, and he just looked at me, he says, I know who you are. You don't have to do that. It's good to see you again. But I got so much out of that, and I participated in so many things in this area.
After hearing your speeches about how the judges react to the Nazi declarations and directions, it makes all judges, I think, wonder if judicial officers show more courage, is the world a better place? Wonder if some of those judges had shown a little more courage, not that we would have avoided it, but maybe we could have avoided
You're right.
some.
I asked Professor Wiesel, who was very interested in the subject, what do you think that the judges lacked? And he said they lacked humanity, which is the ability to see what you're doing affects other people, empathy, basically, which is also the message of the Judicial Conduct Handbook. Judges need empathy. And he also said courage. They just completely lacked any courage. And I also got to spend time with Leon Layson, who was the youngest member of Schindler's List. Brought him to the court here in Santa Ana, and he spoke to the judges here, so they would have an understanding what these laws and these practices could impact people personally.
So let's segue to the Court of Appeal years. You've been here for almost 20 years. Can you share with us some thoughts about your tenure here at the Court of Appeal as a justice?
Sure. Again, I'm grateful to Governor Davis for the appointment and to Burt Pines for leading me through, although his interview was pretty tough. After the interview, I went to the Hyatt and sat on the bench. I don't think they had cell phones then, but I called Susan, maybe I did have a cell phone, and said, I'm never going to get this job. But it turned out okay. The enrobing ceremony was very meaningful in 2002. Both my mom and my dad were alive and were there. And my mom thought this was her revenge. For all the discrimination against her. So yeah, this has been a good ride. When I was a lawyer, I was very frustrated with Court of Appeal opinions because they all seemed like mystery novels to me.
Not mine, though.
Of course not. And I resolved that if I ever became someone who could write an opinion like this, there wouldn't be mystery novels. I would tell the people right up front, this is the issue, this is our conclusion, these are the reasons, affirmed, reversed, whatever. So they don't have to wait till the end. And I would try to be clear in a published opinion, especially, what's the holding? And I think I achieved that. I've been extraordinarily fortunate, as usual. My trial life continued. When I got here, I asked them, pardon me for doing this, but what's your hiring? How do you hire? Because I was told in those days I could hire 3 lawyers. And I asked, how do you hire lawyers? And I won't bore you with the details of how they hire lawyers, but I concluded it could be the worst system ever created. So I said, no, we're going to put the word out, and we're going to cast a very wide net for who I'm going to interview and who I'm going to hire. And we're going to do, not writing samples, but we're going to give people real problems, and they're going to have to write something up. I think that's common practice now. And we're going to have rounds of interviews, not just one interview. And we're going to ask tough questions. And we're going to listen to the answers. And then we're going to hire the right people. And it worked. And the 3 lawyers, God bless them, I love them all, who I hired back in 2002 are still sitting right over here in 2021. Julianne Bancroft, Michelle Troyan, and Matt Ross. They all had illustrious careers before they got here. Matt and Julianne were partners in their really good law firms. Michelle was a senior associate in a really good law firm. Their law firms hated to lose them. I was very fortunate to hire them. They're family. They've been family for a long time.
It's nice that the law firms kind of have a sense of humor about us stealing their best lawyers, because they're sort of our farm teams, all those law firms.
Yeah, no, I can't spend it, I mean, they've been, research lawyers write the drafts. They tell you when you're right. They tell you when the law won't support what your instincts tell you. They go through in excruciating detail what the analysis is. They put up with no, you need subsections. The reader has to understand where they are in the analysis. So put in more subsections, put in a published opinion, say our holding is, and we publish because. But they're wonderful people. I've seen between Michelle and Julianne, we now have 6 who started out as babies, are now college kids mostly, or about to be college kids. And they're just, Julianne, Michelle, and Matt are just fabulous human beings and make me look good. Pretty much everything I have done, I owe to them in this job. I've been fortunate with Judicial Assistance as well. I basically only had 3. Nancy O'Connell and Arlette Cornell Chavez retired, and then I've just hired Tony Martin, and I've been really blessed. They're long-term, and again, they work hard, and they from time to time laugh at my stupid jokes. But I'm very, very grateful. And my colleagues, of course, led by you, are impressive, and they always try to get the right result for the right reasons. I'm very grateful for my relationships among my colleagues, and it's been a really, really, really good ride.
I think we're really fortunate, and I love Pat Donahue. He says this will never happen again. I don't know. I think we've had some relationships and camaraderie here at the Court of Appeal that would rival your days at North.
No, that's right. Again, you don't want to slight people, but they know who they are. My people here, who I consider dear friends, you included. And, we get a lot of benefits here. Being on the Court of Appeal, your name goes out there than many of us. So, on the UCI board, law school board, and the Chapman Law School board. I'm even on a board in New York for the Jewish Law Institute at the Toro Law Center. We all get our share of awards, and because we have higher profile, I think, and I've been very fortunate in that regard. The CJA gave the authors, all of us, the award, their highest award for publishing the book. And, so is the OCBA and Orange County Bar Association, Chapman, UCLA. I've been very fortunate.
Now, if we can segue a little back to the personal life. Susan, you're wife of many, many years.
It's where I started.
Yeah, and it's sort of cyclic, isn't it? We started with Susan, and Susan comes in towards the end again, because Susan is always there for you, professionally and personally.
That's right.
And she's pretty honest with you about, she will tell you when you've gotten off the mark in her opinion. Anything you'd like to share with us about Susan, other than the vending machine meeting or at the Apple machine?
Well, Susan was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so she's yet another Midwest
connection there.
Connection, really good values. She had wonderful parents, Dave and Rose, and her brother Marty and sister Nancy, and we met at UCLA as undergrads, fell in love. We had a wonderful life. She's a loving person. She's a wonderful wife, mother, Bubby, which is Yiddish for grandmother. She's a great person. She's, supported me through all this emotionally and keeps me grounded. I know we've got time issues, but she's the kind of person who, when I was at Morrison and we were invited to all these events, and people would, they were so nice to me. Oh my God, everybody was so nice to Rich Fybel, And I came home one day and Susan said, why do you think everybody's so nice to you? I said, oh, because I'm a nice man, you know. I treat people with kindness, I think. She says, okay, the fact that you have complete control over their assignments, their compensation, their advancement, that has nothing to do with being really nice to you? I said, okay, point made. So she's the realist and the grounded one in our family. She's just a terrific person. She's very kind, compassionate, considerate of everybody, and great judgment in people. She's got the best judge of character of anyone I've ever met. But I think the big takeaway, she's just kind, just a very kind, loving person.
And very supportive.
Very supportive.
How about the kids?
I mean, you try coming home and telling your wife that you're cutting your compensation as a senior partner at Morrison & Forster to a public employee at the lowest level of the Superior Court. You try doing that sometime. And then she says, whatever, you know, let's talk about it, but it makes sense. At this time of your life, do it.
Rich will make it work.
We'll make it work, and we have. Mm. And then, we built a great life and a very loving family.
Well, let's hear about the 2 kids and the grandkids.
Yeah, well, we raised our kids, Stephanie and Dan, in Palos Verdes. We lived there over 20 years. They went to public schools. They were raised in a Jewish household. Stephanie was bat mitzvah, Dan was bar mitzvah. It was a wonderful time in PV. You know, they, because I want to pay tribute for a moment, to friends of both Stephanie and Dan, with the Roy family, with Dave Roy, who's passed away, who was my closest friend at the time. And a client, but we had a really good nuclear group in Palos Verdes, and the kids were part of it, and you end up being friends with your kids' friends' parents.
Yeah, your social circle somehow gets directed by your kids.
So I'm going to talk about my kids, but I'm going to do it in a little reverse order, and the reason will become obvious. For the reason I'm doing it. First of all, Dan was born in 1974, so he's now 46 years old. Growing up, he was a happy, redheaded, kind kid, good in school, excellent athlete, especially baseball, and track. He was always funny, always creative, great artist.
Would have made a great lawyer.
Well, I used to tell him he's the best writer of any young person I've ever seen. We met when I was in Judges College. Between the 2 weeks, you could either come home or you can stay up there. So it was Father's Day weekend, and he went up there that weekend, and he was in a career crossroads. And I was trying to persuade him to be a lawyer because he's just logical and a great writer. And he says, I want to be a comedy writer. I was like, you what? What about health insurance? And he said, no, I want to be a comedy writer. I said, okay. He had earlier graduated from Emory University in Atlanta. He great son, a wonderful son. But he has become very successful, which I'll get to. But more importantly than that, he's just a great guy, wonderful son. He married Garland, who we love. It's great to be able to say you love your daughter-in-law, and we do. She's just wonderful, and she was his boss, in a TV show, and he married his boss. But she also taught him how to to organize a story and for two storylines and all that. And then
I always think this is such a good story because it's the one time that I would say, thank goodness the son did not take his dad's advice to be a lawyer. He would have been a great lawyer, but I'm glad he didn't take your advice.
Yeah, and they have 2 children, Tessa and Max. Tessa's 16, Max is 13. both wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. We enjoy their company. We enjoy watching them grow. They bring joy to us all the time. And then, as I said, he wanted to be a comedy writer, and he became one. And not only became one, he became very, very successful.
Got an Emmy?
Yeah, well, he's now one of the executive producers of Bob's Burgers, which is on Fox now, owned by Disney. He's had an illustrious, very successful career. He's won 2 Emmys for work on Bob's Burgers for his writing. He's been nominated every year. When he doesn't win, we're crushed and think it's, he should have won, but he's won 2 already. He's also won a Writers Guild Award. They only give 1 award for comedy writing. It's for the best episode of any comedy show in the animated category. So he was nominated against the Simpsons episodes and a few other pretty famous ones, and he won. So he's not only won 2 Emmys, he won the Writers Guild Award. And as somewhat important, we share a love of baseball. So he's got a fantasy baseball team, and I have one that I am partners with Dean Zipser on. And we talk about baseball and fantasy baseball a lot, to the chagrin of our entire families. They're very supportive, but they kind of humor us about how much we talk about baseball. He's just a warm, loving man, terrific husband, son, and father. I'm going to talk more about him a little later. Not much later, I know, but he's just a wonderful son. Love him very much.
And you're fortunate to have a wonderful daughter, too.
And our daughter, Stephanie K. Fybel. Stephanie K. is named after my grandmother, Katie, my father's mother. Stephanie is named after Sylvia, who's Susan's aunt. Dan, by the way, is named after the River Dan in Israel. Because Susan and I went there and said, any time we ever have a son, we're going to name him Dan. It was just a beautiful spot. And Robert is after Rachel, who's my mother's mother, who, by the way, lived with us. Not to digress too much, but my mother lived with us. My grandmother lived with us until she passed when I was a young teenager. Think about that. My dad's a gardener, and he supports his mother. He supports his mother's mother living in our house. Pretty amazing. Stephanie, as I say, is now 48. I mean, growing up, she's a happy, good, really great student. Was a real leader in her school, as was Dan. They were both school officers. She was very gifted in theater and singing and acting. She was always the lead in the school plays, always the lead in the community productions. I mean, she was known in Palos Verdes as, she was the lead in everything. Just terrific. She was also a good athlete. She was good. I coached her in girls softball for 9 years. Think about that. I actually coached after she left, but I would drive from from downtown LA to PV to make her games and practices. Then she went to the University of Michigan, got a Bachelor of Fine Arts there, had to audition to get into their program, and blew them away with the Shakespeare thing. And then she went on to get her master's at Contemporary American Theater in San Francisco. So she was able then to turn that into a job for the last 17 years as a drama teacher at Wildwood School in West LA, where she's been a very successful drama student and drama teacher, and is beloved by her students. She has 2 children, Jonah, 10, and Livia, age 14. Again, they're just both great kids. They provide Susan and I wonderful joy. And I recently had my 75th birthday, and one of the highlights was each grandchild wrote me a note about sort of what I mean to them. And you never know what impact you have on other people, and you kind of wonder, did the people notice? And they did. They wrote beautiful notes to me, and very, very, very meaningful. Stephanie is just a loving, caring daughter, wonderful mother. So I do want to close with two stories, and they both involve Stephanie, which is why I waited till the end, which I think is near the end, unless you have more questions. The first story involves my Uncle Harry. Harry's my father's brother, who's now almost 97 years old, and we're still very close to.
And Harry says it's Fybel, not Fybel.
Harry says it's Fybel, so it's got to be right. We've been very close to Harry for our whole lives, my brothers and I, Gary and Kirk. And I'm going to go back just not that many years. Stephanie is producing Sound of Music, the musical, at her high school. And as most people know, it's set in 1938 Austria. It's the Trapp family, the Nazis. It's a whole, that's the setting for Sound of Music. And she was casting Sound of Music, and some of the boys really wanted to be the Nazis. And she was like alarmed. She was like, we're in West Los Angeles, and you want to do that? So she took action. And she went to the show-off foundation at USC and asked for a Holocaust survivor to come speak to the entire school. And she did, and made a real impact on the entire student body. So Steph took real positive action to do that. And then on the closing night of Sound of Music, when the director, Stephanie, gets all the credit and all the flowers and the bouquet and the standing ovation, Harry and Sherry, my aunt who we're very close to, and Harry's wife, attended because we wanted him to see closing night. And he's in a wheelchair, and he's sitting in the audience. There are hundreds of people there. It was a big theater, and they just done the production. And Stephanie got on stage, and they were honoring Stephanie. And instead of, she said thank you, and took the flowers. And then she said, I want to introduce my Uncle Harry. And just so you know who he is, he immigrated to this country as a teenager from Germany in 1938. When he was old enough, he enlisted in the United States Army. They shipped him to Europe. He fought in World War II, in real battles in World War II. He was a translator then for the POWs, German soldiers. He fought in Europe until VE Day, where they shipped him to the Far East Theater. So, I get choked up every time I tell the story. So she said, let me introduce you to Harry. You won't meet many refugees from the Holocaust or from Nazi-occupied Europe. He was also a United States veteran in both Europe and the Far East. And he's here. And the whole place stood up. Whole place. And then the students lined up to get his autograph, talk to him, hug him. It was amazing. But that's Stephanie.
Well, that's Harry.
And that's Harry. And we still see him.
But your mother would say, just to lighten it up, he's not the smartest person you know, was he? He may be the bravest. He may be one of the most distinguished, but she was the smartest person you ever knew.
My mother was amazing. And she raised two, one thing I haven't done is talk about my brothers enough, but I'm very close friends with my brothers and their wives, and they're terrific people. And they gave me a lot of support in this next story I'm going to tell, and my final one. So when Stephanie was a kid, little baby, I sang, which is really hard to believe, but I sang this song, You Are My Sunshine, so that plays a role in this. So in October of 2018, I had suffered from kidney disease for a number of years, but Not that it was under control, but we all have something.
But it took a turn for the worse.
In October of 18, I was told that I had stage 4 renal failure, and that within a fairly short period of time, maybe a year, I either have to have dialysis or a kidney transplant. And that was it. And that a cadaver waiting list in California was years and years and years. And I was already at the age which was borderline acceptable for to have a transplant. And so it would have to have a live donor. And that was pretty sobering news. So, and it wasn't like equivocal. It was, you're in renal failure, this is your only alternative. And I really didn't want my kids to be donors. I didn't want Steph or Dan to have to go through that.
But they did tell you they would be the best matches.
Yeah. So many, many people volunteered, including both my kids, including my brother Gary. Kirk was disqualified for health reasons, including my friends. You know, we haven't covered it. I was president of University Synagogue in Irvine for 2 years. And the people that I served with as executive officers of the synagogue, Sari Schreiber volunteered. Many other people from the synagogue volunteered. I don't name them, but Sari is a dear friend. Beth Cranston, who I mentioned earlier, volunteered. Many, many people, over 20 people, which is unheard of for some little guy like me. And my Rabbi Rockles, was very supportive, and he actually sent a letter to the community, the Jewish community, and the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, sent a little blurb out asking for volunteers. And there were many, many people who volunteered. You know, I was told that he came to me, I had to undergo a lot of tests. It was a very stressful time. And then they came to me and said, we've tested all these people, and the best match is your daughter, Stephanie. And she's the one that will be the donor, unless she changes her mind. And that was a hard decision. But
you resisted that for a while.
I did resist it, but I was persuaded, again, based on facts, that if I said no, there were real repercussions to both of us, kind of psychologically, that they've seen over the years. So I got ready for the surgery. My brother Kirk moved out here from Illinois. He has a house in Orange County, but he moved out here, and we went exercising is too mild a word. We did hiking up these hills. I feel like saying we went uphill both ways, but I feel like we did. It was in Orange County. There were these trails we went on.
Sort of boot camp to get you ready for this surgery.
It was pretty much boot camp, and Gary and Eve were very, they volunteered to take care of Stephanie and did after the surgery, and Stephanie didn't change her mind, and I passed, thankfully, all the medical tests to do this, and on November 5th, 2019, Stephanie's one of her 2 kidneys was transplanted into me. We named the kidney Sunshine.
Susan sent us a text saying both Rich and Stephanie are doing great.
And both Rich and Stephanie are doing great. And the whole family, brothers and wives, and Susan, of course, especially. Susan, if you think about it, I think beyond Stephanie and me, can you imagine having your husband and your daughter in surgery at the same time.
Life-threatening surgery for both of you.
At the same time, yes.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
I can't.
I can't. So she was very, very strong, very loving and supportive. Susan was a real hero in this piece. She guided me through this, trying to make the right decisions every step of the way. You know, yeah. And then Stephanie's doing great. She continues to teach.
And she'll always be grateful she was able to do this for you.
She thinks it was one of the best things, if not the best thing she's ever done. The grandkids have been wonderful. You know, Dan has been very supportive, very generous in his time. Dan moved down to San Diego for the surgery. Susan and I had to rent a place for like 6 weeks because Scripps said, "You're not going anywhere. You have to stay down here within."
I remember seeing a picture of that place. It was beautiful, except there was a walkway right along a cliff that was beautiful. But I thought, well, I hope you don't take a misstep and go down that cliff.
You got it exactly right, K.O. It was good news and bad news. The good news was it was on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and the bad news is it was on a cliff overlooking the ocean. So I came back to work too soon, but I came back to work, and then the pandemic hit. And ironically, if I hadn't had the surgery in November of 19, I would not have been able to have the surgery because they stopped doing kidney transplant surgery. So anyway.
What were you saying? You've led a charmed life or a blessed life, or you certainly have in many respects.
I've lived a charmed and blessed life. I'm very grateful to all the people that have helped me along the way. Yeah, I've had a lot of help. I'm very grateful, and I've been in a position, I guess to sum it up, to have a loving family and to make contributions in areas that I thought were important. And I've just being on the Court of Appeal for almost 20 years has given me a chance to make a contribution to the development of law in California, to try to show that empathy that Professor Vogel talked about, to try to understand the impact of our decisions on the people, the litigants, and the lawyers that we're dealing with. Try to be honest and kind to people, and try to make my parents proud.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with me, and I hope that this video gives others a glimpse into who Justice Richard D. Fybel really is, and also provide some information about your professional accomplishments, the legacy you leave, and I think it'll be inspirational to a lot of people, because a lot of people have had similar life experiences, and the way you dealt with them, I think, will help others. So we've worked together for over, roughly 20 years,
yes.
Not few months short of 20 years. I want to thank you for being such a great colleague, and for being such a great friend, and thank you for putting up with this interview.
Well, the feeling's very mutual. You're a wonderful person and friend and leader of this court.